In 1933, Germany was broke. 6 million unemployed. Just 6 years later, in 1939, that same bankrupt nation launched its blitzkrieg with the most advanced military force the world had ever seen. How did the poorest country in Europe pull off this miracle in less time than a car loan? Before we expose the answer, type where you are watching this video from in the comments now. I want to know how far this video goes. Here is the uncomfortable truth nobody teaches you. Hitler didn't fund his war machine, he leveraged it. He counterfeited it using secret treasury notes. He blackmailed foreign banks. He stole $19 billion in gold, and some of the world's biggest corporations handed him the keys. Let's rewind to 1918. Germany loses World War I. The Treaty of Versailles doesn't just defeat Germany, it strangles it. The Allies demand 132 billion gold marks in reparations. That's roughly $442 billion in today's money. But here's the twist. Germany wasn't just broke, it was destroyed. Millions dead, cities bombed, factories demolished. The Allies were demanding gold from a country that had just burned its furniture to stay warm. So Germany did what broke nations do. It printed money, lots of it. By 1923, German hyperinflation became the textbook case for how to destroy an economy. A loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. Workers were paid twice a day because by evening, their morning wages were worthless. People burned cash in their fireplaces because it was cheaper than buying wood. Life savings vanished overnight. The middle class was wiped out. This wasn't just an economic collapse. This was a psychological wound that never healed. An entire generation watched their life's work become worthless paper, and they were angry, desperate, looking for someone to blame. Enter a failed art student with a mustache and a scapegoat. But here's what most people miss. Hitler didn't rise to power because of his speeches or his ideology. He rose to power because Germany's economic elite decided he was useful. The industrialists, the bankers, the old military commanders, they saw chaos and they saw opportunity. They thought they could control him, use him to stabilize Germany, crush the communists, and restore order. They were catastrophically wrong. But before Hitler could build tanks, he needed to solve a basic problem. How do you fund a military when you're bankrupt and the entire world is watching your bank account? When Hitler became chancellor in 1933, he appointed a man named Hjalmar Schacht as president of the Reichsbank. Now, Schacht was a genius, not a moral genius, but a financial one. He had helped Germany recover from hyperinflation in the 1920s. He understood money, debt, and most importantly, he understood illusions. Schacht created something called Mefo Bills, and this is where things get fascinating. Here's how it worked. Germany wanted to rebuild its military, but the Treaty of Versailles strictly forbid it. If Germany started openly printing money to build tanks and planes, the Allies would invade immediately. So Schacht created a shell company called Metallische Forschungsgesellschaft, or Mefo for short. This company existed only on paper. The government would give Mefo bills to arms manufacturers like Krupp, IG Farben, and Siemens as payment for weapons. These bills were essentially IOUs. The manufacturers could then take these bills to any German bank and exchange them for real money. The banks accepted them because the Reichsbank guaranteed them. But here's the trick. These bills didn't show up on Germany's official budget. They were technically private debt from a private company. It was a financial shell game. Hitler was printing money to build weapons, but on paper, it looked like private business transactions. The world was watching Germany's official military budget, which stayed small and harmless. Meanwhile, billions of marks were flowing into the war machine through this hidden channel. Between 1934 and 1938, Germany issued 12 billion marks worth of Mefo bills. That's roughly $48 billion today. Tanks, planes, submarines, rifles, all purchased with money that technically didn't exist. But Mefo bills had an expiration date. They came due in 5 years. By 1938, Schacht realized the entire scheme was about to collapse. You can't keep printing phantom money forever. Eventually, someone asks to be paid back in real currency. Schacht went to Hitler and said, "We need to stop. The economy is going to implode. Hitler's response was chilling. We'll pay them back with conquered territory. He wasn't joking. The entire Nazi economy was built on a timer. Hitler had to go to war, not because of ideology alone, but because his financial house of cards required constant expansion. He needed to loot other countries to pay back the money he'd already spent. It was a pyramid scheme that could only survive through conquest. Let's talk about Austria for a moment. In March 1938, Germany annexed Austria in what they called the Anschluss. Hitler rolled tanks into Vienna, and the world watched with concern but did nothing. Politically, it was a violation of international law. Financially, it was a bank robbery. Austria's gold reserves seized, its foreign currency seized, its factories seized, its raw materials seized. Within weeks, Germany had stolen 1.4 billion marks worth of Austrian assets. That's about $5.6 billion today. But the real prize wasn't gold, it was Austria's Jews. Under the Nuremberg laws, Jews were systematically stripped of their property, businesses, savings, and homes. They were forced to pay a flight tax just to leave the country, essentially ransoming their own lives. If they owned a business, they had to sell it to Aryan owners at a fraction of its value. If they owned property, it was confiscated. If they had savings, it was seized. This wasn't just genocide, it was theft on an industrial scale. And Austria was just the beginning. Czechoslovakia was next. Germany took the Sudetenland in 1938, then the rest of Czechoslovakia in 1939. More gold, more factories, more forced labor, more stolen Jewish wealth. The pattern was clear: invade, loot, repeat. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, officially starting World War II, it wasn't just a military invasion. It was an economic raid. Poland's gold reserves were seized. Its currency was declared worthless and replaced with German marks at rigged exchange rates. Polish factories were dismantled and shipped back to Germany. Millions of Poles were forced into slave labor. And then came the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa in 1941 was the largest invasion in human history. Hitler sent 3 million men into Russia with one clear objective: secure resources, oil from the Caucasus, grain from Ukraine, metals from the Urals. The invasion was a resource grab disguised as an ideological crusade. By 1942, Germany controlled most of Europe, and everywhere the Wehrmacht marched. The plunder machine followed. Belgium's gold, stolen; France's gold, stolen; Netherlands, Norway, Greece, Yugoslavia, all looted. Entire national treasuries were emptied and shipped back to Berlin. But here's the dark genius of it. Germany didn't just steal gold and currency, they stole labor. By 1944, roughly 20% of Germany's workforce was forced laborers, 12 million people, slaves, working in factories, farms, and mines, unpaid, unfed, worked to death. This was Hitler's economic model: conquest as financing. The war paid for itself through theft. Now here's where the story gets uncomfortable, because Hitler didn't build his war machine alone. He had help, lots of it, from some of the biggest names in business. Let's start with IG Farben. This chemical conglomerate was the largest company in Europe and the fourth largest in the world. They produced everything from dyes to pharmaceuticals, but during the Nazi era, they also produced Zyklon B, the poison gas used in death camps. They built a massive factory at Auschwitz using slave labor. Thousands of prisoners worked there until they died, then they were replaced with fresh prisoners. IG Farben didn't just enable the Holocaust, they profited from it. Then there's Krupp, Germany's steel and arms giant. The Krupp family had been making weapons for Germany for generations. Under the Nazis, they expanded massively. Tanks, artillery, submarines. Krupp used over 100,000 slave laborers in their factories. Workers were beaten, starved, and worked to death. The company made billions. BMW, Volkswagen, Daimler-Benz, all used forced labor, all profited, all knew exactly what they were doing. But it wasn't just German companies. American corporations got involved too, and this is the part that really stings. IBM, yes, that IBM. They provided the punch card technology that the Nazis used to catalog Jews, track deportations, and manage concentration camps. The Holocaust was a logistical nightmare. How do you identify, track, and murder 11 million people? You need data management. IBM provided it. Their German subsidiary, Die Homag, worked directly with the SS. They knew what their machines were being used for. They made a fortune. Ford Motor Company. Henry Ford was a notorious anti-Semite who published a newspaper filled with conspiracy theories about Jewish people. Hitler admired him and even kept a portrait of Ford in his office. Ford's German subsidiary built trucks for the Wehrmacht. Even after America entered the war, Ford's factories in occupied France continued producing for the Nazis. The company claimed they had no control over their foreign subsidiaries. That was a lie. They had control. They just didn't want to lose the business. Standard Oil, part of the Rockefeller Empire. They had agreements with IG Farben to share chemical patents, including synthetic rubber technology that was critical for Germany's war effort. Even after the war started, they found ways to continue business through neutral countries. ITT Corporation owned telephone networks across Europe, including in Germany. They maintained those networks throughout the war, facilitating Nazi communications. After the war, ITT even sued the US government for damages because Allied bombs had destroyed their factories in Germany. They won. American taxpayers compensated them for factories that had built weapons for Hitler. Chase Bank and other American financial institutions helped Germany move money through neutral countries like Switzerland. They laundered stolen gold. They hid assets. They processed transactions that funded the war machine. Here's the thing, some of these companies claim they had no choice, that the Nazis forced them, that they were just trying to protect their employees and assets. And maybe there's some truth to that for some of them. War is complicated. Business in wartime is messy. But here's what we know for sure. Many of these companies didn't just comply reluctantly. They competed enthusiastically. They bid for contracts. They expanded their operations. They lobbied for access to slave labor. They made money, lots of it. After the war, some executives were prosecuted at Nuremberg. Alfred Krupp was convicted of crimes against humanity. He served 6 years, then was released and had his fortune restored. IG Farben was broken up, but its successor companies, BASF, Bayer, Hoechst, they're still around, still thriving. Most American companies were never prosecuted. They paid settlements, issued apologies, moved on. The question isn't just how Hitler funded his war machine, it's who helped him and why. We need to talk about Switzerland, because when you're building an illegal war machine and stealing from conquered nations, you need somewhere to put the money. You need a bank that doesn't ask questions. Switzerland was that bank. Switzerland declared neutrality in World War II, which sounds noble until you understand what neutrality actually meant. We'll do business with everyone. The Swiss banking system became the laundromat for Nazi gold. Here's how it worked. Germany would loot gold from occupied countries. Gold bars stamped with the marks of national banks from Belgium, Netherlands, Poland, Yugoslavia. Then they'd melt it down, restamp it as German gold, and deposit it in Swiss banks. The Swiss would accept it, no questions asked, and give Germany hard currency in return. Francs, dollars, currency they could use to buy resources from neutral countries like Sweden and Spain. The Swiss National Bank processed roughly $1.3 billion worth of Nazi gold during the war. About 316 million of that was confirmed as looted. But here's the horror. Some of that gold came from concentration camps. Wedding rings, teeth fillings, jewelry, all melted down, turned into bars, and deposited into Swiss vaults. The Swiss knew, they absolutely knew. Their bankers could see the volume of gold flowing in. They could see the inconsistencies in documentation. But they accepted it anyway because neutrality was profitable. And it wasn't just gold. Swiss banks held accounts for Nazi officials, German industrialists, and wealthy individuals fleeing the Reich. After the war, many of those accounts went unclaimed because the account holders were dead or in hiding. The banks kept the money. For decades, they denied these accounts existed. It wasn't until the 1990s, after intense pressure from Holocaust survivors and their families, that Swiss banks finally admitted they held billions in unclaimed Nazi-era assets. They paid settlements, issued apologies, but here's the uncomfortable truth. Swiss banking secrecy made the Nazi war economy possible. Without it, Germany couldn't have converted stolen gold into usable currency. The theft would have stalled. Switzerland didn't pull a trigger or drop a bomb, but they counted the money that bought the bullets. By 1944, Germany's economy was a zombie. It was dead, but still moving. The entire system ran on stolen resources and slave labor. There was no legitimate economy left, just extraction, exploitation, and death. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, performed a miracle of industrial efficiency. He streamlined production. He organized forced labor. He kept the factories running even as Allied bombs rained down. German tank and aircraft production actually peaked in 1944 at the height of the bombing campaigns. It was a testament to brutal efficiency. But even Speer couldn't create something from nothing. By late 1944, Germany was out of oil, out of rubber, out of metals, out of food. Soldiers were starving. Tanks sat idle for lack of fuel. The Luftwaffe stopped flying because they had no aviation fuel. The Wehrmacht started using horse-drawn carts because they couldn't fuel trucks. The financial pyramid scheme had reached its inevitable conclusion. There was nothing left to steal, no more countries to invade, no more gold to loot. The war machine ground to a halt not because of military defeat alone, but because of economic collapse. When Berlin fell in May 1945, Soviet soldiers found the Reichsbank vaults. Most of the gold was gone, shipped south in a desperate attempt to buy time. Trainloads of gold and currency were hidden in salt mines and lakes. Some of it was recovered. Much of it disappeared, likely stolen by soldiers, officers, and opportunists in the chaos of collapse. So what was the final bill? How much did Hitler's war actually cost? In purely financial terms, Germany spent roughly 400 billion Reichsmarks on the war. That's about $1.3 trillion in today's currency. But that doesn't count the looting, the theft, the slave labor, the destroyed cities and lives. The real cost is incalculable. 60 million dead, entire cities reduced to rubble, economies destroyed, families shattered, generational trauma that echoes to this day. And here's the thing that should keep us awake at night. Hitler didn't fund this through genius or magic. He funded it through theft, exploitation, and the willing complicity of governments and corporations who decided profit mattered more than morality. So what do we take from this? Why does this story matter now, more than 80 years later? Because the mechanisms that funded Hitler's war machine still exist. Financial secrecy, corporate complicity, the willingness to look the other way when money is involved. These didn't disappear in 1945, they evolved. Today, we watch corporations do business with authoritarian regimes. We see banks moving money for dictators. We witness supply chains built on forced labor, and we tell ourselves it's complicated, that business is business, that we can't control what happens in other countries. But that's exactly what they said in the 1930s. The Nazi economy wasn't an aberration. It was capitalism stripped of ethics. It was the logical endpoint of a system that prioritizes profit above all else. When companies decide that quarterly earnings matter more than human rights, when banks decide that secrecy matters more than justice, when governments decide that stability matters more than morality, we inch closer to that same darkness. Here's what the history books often miss. The Holocaust wasn't just a failure of morality, it was a failure of economics. It was a system where human beings became commodities, where lives had price tags, where suffering was profitable. We want to believe this could never happen again, that we've learned, that we're different. But are we? We live in a world where cobalt for our smartphones is mined by children in Congo, where Uyghurs in China are forced to pick cotton that ends up in our clothes, where migrant workers in Qatar died building stadiums for the World Cup, where corporations lobby against transparency laws and human rights regulations because it might hurt profits. The names have changed, the technology is different, but the fundamental question remains the same. What are we willing to ignore for the sake of convenience and profit? Hitler's war machine was funded by a society that chose not to see, that chose comfort over confrontation, that chose profit over principle. And before we congratulate ourselves on being better, we should ask, what are we choosing not to see right now? Let's bring this back to where we started. In 1933, Germany was broken. In 1939, it had the strongest military in the world. That transformation didn't happen because of one man's speeches or one nation's rage. It happened because of a financial system that prioritized profit over people, a banking system that prioritized secrecy over justice, a corporate system that prioritized shareholders over humanity. Hitler didn't fund his war machine through genius. He funded it through theft, exploitation, and the willing participation of institutions that should have said no. Mefo Bills, looted gold, forced labor, corporate complicity, Swiss banks, American companies, all pieces of the same machine. And here's the truly disturbing part. After the war, we learned all of this. We documented it at Nuremberg. We wrote books about it. We built museums to remember it. We said, never again. And yet versions of these systems still exist. Financial secrecy is still legal. Corporations still exploit workers in countries with weak labor laws. Banks still move money for authoritarian regimes. We still prioritize profit over principle, just more quietly. The lesson of how Hitler funded his war machine isn't just about the past. It's a warning about the present, about what happens when we let money matter more than morality, when we let complexity become an excuse for complicity, when we let convenience blind us to cruelty. This isn't ancient history. This is a blueprint. And the uncomfortable truth is that the world hasn't fundamentally changed the systems that made it possible. We've just gotten better at not looking. So here's what I want you to do. Look, pay attention to where your money goes. Question who profits from your purchases. Demand transparency from companies and banks. Vote with your wallet and your vote. Because the only way to ensure this never happens again is to make sure the mechanisms that enabled it can't exist. Hitler's war machine was built on our grandparents' indifference. What are we building with ours? Before you go, I want you to answer one question in the comments, and I want you to be honest. If your favorite company was caught using forced labor overseas, but their products were significantly cheaper than ethical alternatives, would you still buy from them? Type your answer below, yes or no, no judgment, just honesty. Because until we're willing to put our money where our morals are, we're just hoping someone else will do the right thing. And history shows us exactly where those leads. Thanks for watching Vaulted Wisdom. If this made you think differently, hit that subscribe button. We've got more uncomfortable truths coming your way. See you in the next one.